My name is Kerry McCauley, and I'm here to talk to you about international ferry flying and how to handle yourself during in-flight emergencies, which pretty much go hand in hand, unfortunately. So, I got my start ferry flying in 1990, working for a company called Orient Air. When I first started, I had no ferry flying experience at all, but I'd heard about the company and heard about ferry flying and made it my mission, even before I got my pilot's license, to become a pilot. And once I got my license in about 1,000 hours, I hit the owner of the company up and he hired me on the spot, unfortunately because they'd just lost a pilot. And I figured they'd start me off nice and easy, you know, a couple of flights to Iowa, maybe all the way down to Florida or something, you know, test, you know, kind of get me some experience. No, but instead I got a call the next week, and they wanted me to ferry a Beach Duchess, which is a light twin, to Portugal. I'm like, okay, I guess we're going right in the deep end right off the bat. And then I got the next little bit of interesting news. I was going to be in the plane all by myself. Awesome. Thanks for holding my hand. I was going to have my boss with me. He was in another plane, but I was going to be by myself in the cockpit. But it wasn't like they were just going to throw me in the deep water without any training. They ran me through Orient Air's rigorous ferry pilot training course, which consisted of sitting in my boss's office for 2 hours, drinking scotch and listening to all the ways you could get killed over the North Atlantic. It was very inspiring. So our route on that first trip was St. Paul, Minnesota to Bangor, Maine, where we cleared customs, then up to St. John's, Newfoundland, it's an island on the east coast of Canada. And from there, it was 1,800 miles of open ocean to Santa Maria down in the Azores. And let me tell you, the first time you look over your shoulder and you see that shoreline disappear and there's nothing but open ocean for miles and miles, that's kind of a gut check. But, you know, no matter how nervous I was getting started, I needn't have worried. The first trip was just beautiful. It was a piece of cake. I mean, blue skies, sunny weather, smooth as silk. The engine was running great. I was sitting there reading a book, listening to my Walkman. I realized at that moment that I had definitely made the right choice to become a ferry pilot. And that feeling lasted right up until about the midway point. And then it wasn't me who had the problem, it was my boss. He called me and he said he'd lost his vacuum pump. He was about 50 miles ahead of me in a 206. And he was really, let's just say, not current on his partial panel stuff, needle ball airspeed, and pretty nervous because the second half of the trip was forecast to be low clouds, high winds, heavy rain, and at night, because this was just before New Year's, and days are really short, especially when you're heading eastbound. So he wasn't too confident in his abilities to find Santa Maria by himself, so he came up with a great idea. He was going to circle in place, let me catch up to him, and then we'd fly night IFR formation to the Azores. Awesome, why not? Sign me up. So that's what we did. I found him, he'd got on my wing, and you know, I really have to appreciate and thank him for having that emergency, because it really took my mind off how scared I was flying at night over open ocean trying to find the Azores. Because what I was really scared about the rest of that trip was him hitting me. He's back there, I'm looking, I can see his position lights bobbing and weaving forward and back, and it's kind of dicey. But he was flying a Cessna 206, a turbine conversion. And yeah, so that was kind of an interesting start to ferry flying. And unfortunately, that pretty much set the bar for a 30-year career in ferry flying, because I've had just about every in-flight emergency you can imagine, and then some. So it was a good start. So people ask me a couple of basic questions about ferry flying. Number one is, how do you get small airplanes over the Atlantic Ocean? You know, number one factor that you got to overcome is fuel. You know, your average 182 or Mooney or something like that doesn't have the range to get 1,500 miles or 1,800 miles of open ocean. So what we do is we install ferry tanks. This is a picture of the 182 on my second trip. You can see the big ferry tank mounted inside. You know, they plummet right into the wing, or we go into the wing tanks, or go right into the fuel system. And when we're putting ferry tanks in there, we're allowed to go 30% over max gross weight. And when I started, we were allowed 2 inches of aft CG. But they took that away from us after a while because too many guys were getting slow and getting killed. So Then we had to move the ferry tanks up, and as you notice, everything's pushed way forward because CG is definitely a big problem when you're dealing with ferry tanks. So these planes are pretty tough to get out of even sitting on the ramp. Next thing you need to do is put an HF radio, because your VHF radio isn't going to work those long ocean distances. So you notice on top of that ferry tank there's a radio there, and that allows you to talk to gander control and give them position reports. Then you got your raft on top of that, all your survival gear. Add in a big bag of snacks and 160 pounds of stupid pilot, and there you are. You're all set to go fly over the North Atlantic. Here's a picture of a 402 I tanked. That's actually en route to Dodoma, Tanzania. Yeah, that picture's in flight. Nobody up there. George is doing a good job. That's some of the tanks that we use when we're ferry flying. Other things that we have to, unique challenges that we have in ferry flying is, some of the normal stuff, weather, maintenance, customs, things like that. But what makes ferry flying unique is when you're flying over portions of the globe that you don't have any outs, once you cross the point of no return, if you cross it, you're committed. The point of no return, we also call it the equal time point, is that line where once you cross it, you don't have enough fuel to get back to your destination, no matter what happens. So once you cross that line, you're committed, especially over the North Atlantic. There's nowhere to put down. So if you've got some weather, a line of thunderstorms, you got to pick your way through. If you get some icing, change altitudes. Sometimes you got to fly right over the wave tops and let the salt spray kind of melt the ice, and hopefully the water's a little bit warmer down there. That's always exciting. If you got maintenance problems, something wrong with the engine, you got to baby it along. And it's either that, or you're going swimming. Well, hopefully you're going rafting, but that all depends if you get out of the plane or not. Because like I mentioned, these planes are really difficult to get out of just sitting on the ramp, because you've got a CG problem, so everything's shoved really far forward. So usually the pilot seat is way far forward, and you're flying like this. And so getting out of that plane upside down at night, sinking in 30-foot swells, is not something that I ever cared to try, but I have met a couple guys that did it and made it out successful. And unfortunately, the company I worked for had 3 guys that were unsuccessful in their ditching. So it's always something that to be really concerned about. Because people ask me, is ferry flying really that dangerous? Is it just hyped up? And no. Back when I started in the 90s, we lost 3 pilots a year over the North Atlantic. Not my company, but all ferry flying, on average. So it was definitely something to be concerned with. And when I started, one of the big challenges was also navigation. I started in 1990 on my first trip, and we didn't have GPS back then. So basically, we would get a winds aloft forecast from Nav Canada and sit on the plotting table with your big monster paper map, and you get out your E6B, plot your great circle route, get your lat long winds aloft forecast, and get your little heading corrections every hour or so. And then once you take off, you just follow your flight plan and hope the winds aloft forecast was reasonably correct. Because once you're out over the ocean, there's no way to cross-reference your track. You've just got, I'm going southeast, hope I find the Azores. It's always kind of funny. You'd have to do position reports to gander control. They ask you, where are you? We're like, I don't know, middle of the Atlantic. I saw a ship an hour ago. Does that help? So yeah, a lot of things are pretty tough when you're ferry flying. Like I mentioned, the ditching is one of the main concerns, and so survival and survival gear is one of the things that I really emphasize when I'm getting ready for a ferry trip. I always bring a raft along because you're going to be boating for a while, and a survival suit because water is pretty darn cold. So even if you don't have your raft, even in your raft, you're not going to last very long. But without a raft, you've got about 20 minutes, and then you're done. And you plan on being in your raft for quite a while, because once you're more than about 100 miles or so offshore, helicopters can't get you. They don't have the range. So then you're going to be counting on a boat, and boats are slow. Just last December, there was a brand new Platus Porter that was flying from California to Hawaii, and right smack dab in the middle, they turned their ferry tank on, and it didn't work, and they ran out of gas, and that Platus is now sitting at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. And those pilots were in the raft for 21 hours, and that's really good for them. In between Hawaii and California, you got lots of ships and Coast Guard and stuff. Out over the Atlantic Ocean, you can count on a couple of days. So Other things that I would bring for survival gear is I always have when I started, it was an actual ELT out of a plane. Never really was very confident in the ability to find me with that. So now I have a nice EPIRB rescue beacon. Signal flares, or a rescue, or a signal laser. That's what I use these days because you can't get the flares back on airlines. Some extra water, space blanket, couple of candy bars, handheld radio. Sat phone would be nice, but they're too expensive and I'm too cheap, so just got going with the radio. And everything that I have that I want to get out with me, I have zipped inside my survival suit. Because once that plane's upside down and sinking, it's going to be a devil of a time getting out of it. So if I can get out with my raft and my body, I think I'm doing good. One second here. So a lot of times, one of the biggest challenges that we have as a ferry pilot is dealing with fatigue. We have long days, usually trying to get up about 4 o'clock in the morning, get out to the airport, get off before dawn. Because you've got a long day of flying ahead of you. 8-hour day of flying, that's an easy day. Often we got 12 to 14-hour legs when we're going over the Atlantic or the Sahara Desert or Africa. So you get out to the plane, try to get before dawn, fly all day. You're going through time zones when you're going east, so by the time you get to your destination, it's pretty late at night. Everything's closed. Takes an hour or so to get out of the airport because you got to get the plane fueled, go through customs, all that jazz. Get to the hotel. Nothing's open, so you can't get any food, so you're eating out of your snack bag. And then you go to, try to get some sleep. And good luck, because you just got done flying, probably a 10-hour day. You're still jazzed from flying. Your adrenaline's still up. And you probably got a pretty challenging flight ahead of you the next day, so good luck trying to shut your brain off and get some sleep. But it's actually not that big of a deal, because it's super easy to get sleep the next day in the cockpit. Yeah, get very sleepy, and we're always by ourselves. It's just too expensive to have 2 pilots. So staying awake in the cockpit is probably one of the biggest challenges in ferry flying. So I do a bunch of stuff to keep me awake. Do isometric exercises, pinch the inside of your thigh, listen to a lot of music, drum along, sing along, drum on the instrument panel, play a lot of air guitar. Turns out I got pretty good at air guitar. Helps to practice. Drink a lot of diet soda, though. Diet soda and coffee. Keep that caffeine going through your system. Of course, science. Liquid in, liquid out. Sooner or later, that bladder overpressure light comes on, and you got to do something. Now, my boss, when I first started ferry flying, he always told me to bring along a plastic jug. You can do your business into that so you're not so uncomfortable. But I never cared for that method because I hated walking into the airport at the end of a long day carrying a jug of apple juice. It's kind of embarrassing. So I had developed the Ziploc baggie method. Get a nice quart Ziploc baggie, pee into that. Always use 2 baggies. You're going to have to trust me on that one. Seal it up. You can throw it in your garbage bag, stick it under the seat. Don't forget it there, especially below the equator. Also trust me on that one. Or if you're lucky to be flying in a plane with an in-flight window, just pop the window open, chuck it out. No muss, no fuss. Piece of cake. Of course, over the ocean, I would save my pee bags for targets of opportunity, ships. Pilot to bombardier. Now, I don't think I ever hit anybody, but if I did, I'm really sorry. And we don't need to go into the details of what you have to do if you have to do that other business. Suffice it to say, it involves a really weird yoga pose, and it's not very pleasant. So just skip the all-you-can-eat seafood buffet at the St. John's Radisson before a long ocean flight. That, again, you're going to have to trust me on that one, too. So I had a lot of things happen to me. When you're ferry flying, you run into some really crazy situations. Number one, the biggest thing that you're going to run into that's a problem is dealing with your ferry tank. That's a big modification to the airplane, and that's where things go wrong. I was flying a Mooney at 19,000 feet, had a ferry tank malfunction, and I was penetrating a line of thunderstorms and had the engine go out and had the dead stick back from 19,000 feet. Super fun. Flying a Bonanza from St. John's direct to Paris. I'd landed in St. John's after a full day flying and found out that there was really strong winds aloft over the North Atlantic. And did some calculations and found that I could go straight from St. John's, 2,500 miles all the way to Paris in one go if I left right away. And doing that, I would I would skip going to the Azores, to basically save a whole day of flying. I'd save the company the money for the fuel, time on the aircraft, hotel fees, taxi, meals, all that stuff. The fact that I was going to get an extra day partying in Paris had nothing to do at all with my decision to just press on. I swear to God, I was just trying to save the company money. So I took off that night and got set up. I had to stay at 15,000 feet because that's where the strong winds loft were. And about 4 hours into the flight, my wing tanks were getting low, and it was time to turn on the ferry tanks. So I reached back and turned them on. Went back to reading the book I was reading. A couple minutes later, I noticed that the wing tanks weren't filling up, which was kind of odd, because I'd been using that ferry system all the way from St. Paul. I'd been working fine. Looked, make sure I turned on the ferry tank correctly. Yep. And it wasn't flowing. And that was kind of a problem, because I only had about a half hour left of fuel left, and I definitely didn't have enough fuel to get back to Canada or even to Ireland, definitely not to Paris. And I was kind of in a tricky situation there because I needed that gas, or I was going to see if that raft I was carrying with really worked. So I sat there and looked at it. I tried everything. I shook the plane around, looked in the cap, nothing. I disconnected. If you notice the top of this ferry tank, there's a black line. That's a air pressure line. We pressurize these tanks when that forces the fuel out to the wing tanks. So I disconnected that. And sure enough, the pressure line wasn't working. There's no pressure coming out of it. And I sat there holding that line and looking at that tank and thought, if I can blow up an air mattress, maybe I can blow up a ferry tank. So I just put it in my mouth and started blowing. And after a couple minutes, I noticed I'd moved a little fuel, and it's like, eureka, my Apollo 11 moment is successful. I figured it out. Then I looked and saw that I'd only moved a couple of gallons of gas and did some calculations and realized I was going to have to blow in that tank all night to get to Paris. I still had 9 hours left to go. And so that's what I did. And let me tell you, that was a long night. Because like I said, I was at 15,000 feet. Oh, I also didn't have any oxygen, so don't tell anybody. Got a pretty good high altitude tolerance as long as you're sitting still. But blowing into that ferry tank is pretty much the opposite of sitting still. So yeah, just a touch of hypoxia, just a little bit. I think enough that I passed out about 3 times. And that was the thing that was really scaring me, because I figured if I passed out and the wing tanks went dry, I was pretty sure the engine stopping was going to wake me up. But I didn't think I was going to be able to pressurize the whole fuel system in time to get the engine going before we hit the ocean. So it's kind of a dicey night. And as the further along I went, the more air volume was in the ferry tank, the harder it was to pressurize it. So it was pretty tough. And I also couldn't land as I got closer, I called for the weather report in Ireland, and it was 0-0, all the airports were closed. I could have declared an emergency and gone and landed, but in the shape I was in, I was pretty doubtful that my ability to shoot a 0-0 approach in a Bonanza, so just kept going all the way to Paris. But I made it, and it was awesome, had a lot of fun, and nobody gave a crap about it after I landed. They stamped my passport and said, "Have a nice night." I was wondering, where's my parade? So yeah, you run into a lot of real strange things when you're ferry flying. Probably one of the most multiple malfunction challenges I had one night when I was ferrying a Piper Navajo from Florida to Thailand. And on this trip, I decided for the very first time, I'm going to bring a passenger along. It's my friend Lee there. We grew up together. I said, "Come on, Lee, it's an adventure. You're going to love it. You're going to have a blast." And one of the things that you got to remember about most of these planes that I ferry fly, they're mostly used airplanes. So they've been sitting for a long time. It takes a long time to sell them. Now, they all have a fresh annual once we pick them up, but sometimes that annual isn't quite as thorough as it should be. So we'd had some definite big problems on the way to Thailand. In Greenland, I stopped in, and we got oil going all over the left engine. Turns out I'd blown a valve cover gasket. It was going to take 2 weeks to get a new gasket, so I had to make a new valve cover gasket out of cardboard. I took the old one, stenciled it out, used my third-grade art skills with the scissors and cut a new one out and put it on there, and got me to Iceland. That kind of worked. Then that day, just before takeoff, we were leaving Saudi Arabia, leaving Riyadh, and it's a pretty brown, hazy day. And we take off, and climbing through about 12,000 feet, had an RBL come on. Oh, RBL is a really bad light. Those red lights on the instrument panel you never want to see. I'd lost one of my vacuum pumps, but no big deal. I got 2 engines, 2 vacuum pumps. You gotta love redundancy. Piece of cake. Minor emergency. Hey, it's an adventure. All right, we're having a good time. Climb up, get on top. Sun goes down. You know, I'm basically IMC because I'm on top of this just massive dust layer, heading to Oman. And about 20 minutes later, the second one goes. Yay! Now we're having fun. Both vacuum pumps went, 0 gyro pressure, and as you know, that runs all your engine or your attitude instruments and stuff. So back to needleball airspeed. Although I would have been if I'd have been flying an old airplane. Luckily, this is a brand new Navajo conversion. They'd put a brand new glass cockpit in it. Everything worked as advertised. You know, I had battery backup and all that good backup. So it was a pretty nice brand new airplane. Oh wait, no, that was a different plane. This one was big old steam gauges, and sure, yeah, everything was in op. And as you notice, kind of just up and to the right of the 2 RBLs there is the turn and bank coordinator, and it's one of the old style where the little airplane stays in position, and when you make a turn, the back card moves. And so when you turn right, it goes left. And let me tell you, getting set on that was, it took a while to get used to that, but you know what? I ended up really enjoying that night. It was a great challenge. You know, I loved being challenged, and I had my best friend sitting there with me to kind of keep me honest and help me with my scan. And I figured, all right, I've made it through this, and what else could go wrong? Here we are, ferrying this plane around the world, and once again, we've had an emergency and come through unscathed. So while I'm in the middle of my scan, I figured, I probably ought to do that, complete scan. You got to keep checking your engine instruments, just because your vacuum pumps are out doesn't mean nothing else is going wrong, but really, what else is going to go wrong? Oh, look. My oil pressure is really low, almost to the red line. Oil temp, really high, almost to the red line. Wonderful. Told my buddy Lee, hey, would you do me a favor and shine your flashlight out at that right engine for me, please? Yeah, it's completely covered with oil. Awesome. So I got to shut that down. I felt like I was in a simulator. Like, all right, let's see what this guy's got. Fail vacuum pump number 1. That didn't even get him. Fail vacuum pump number 2. Dang, he's still doing good. Kill the right engine. Thinking, come on, man. What's next? You gonna give me athlete's foot or something? Yeah, it was quite a long night, but we managed to get her down, single engine, needleball airspeed. And the guys came out the next day. The owner talked to the owner, and he got his mechanics come there, Larry and Curly. Mo was on vacation, apparently. They filled it up with oil. We actually loaned it. You could see the oil spitting out of the engine. And they filled it up with oil. We wiped it all down. I'm like, great. So you guys brought a cylinder, right? You're going to do all this stuff? They didn't speak English, so I had to call the company. And the boss, they hand me the phone. He goes, okay, so you all ready to go? I'm like, go where? Well, cross the Arabian Gulf and go to India is your next stop, right? I'm like, yeah, but we got to fix the plane. No, my mechanics say it's fine. They filled it up with oil again. It only had 2 quarts from Saudi Arabia. Oh, you can be fine. I'm like, no, I think. So that's the only plane in 30 years that I haven't finished. But as far as I know, it's still sitting there because I may be stupid and crazy, but I'm not both at the same time. But ferry flying isn't all danger and near-death experiences. I've been lucky enough to have some of the most amazing experiences in the world. I got to buzz the Amazon River first thing in the morning twice. That was awesome. Above the African savanna, seeing elephants and giraffes. Buzz up and down the coast of Greenland, which is one of the most beautiful places in the world. I mean, the mountains are really steep and the fjords are super deep. You can see the ice cap oozing off into hundreds of glaciers, into a million icebergs. It's fantastic. Maybe get the fact that I like to fly low in other people's airplanes when they're not looking. I think one of the most fun things I got to do is I was delivering a Cherokee 6 to Anwar Sadat's son, and I picked him up at in Alexandria, which is on the Mediterranean coast, and together we flew to Egypt, or to Cairo. And as we got close, he asked me, have you ever seen the pyramids? Nope, first time in Egypt. This is a dream come true, a pilot's dream adventure. Yes, I want to go see the pyramids. We headed that way. Sure enough, there were the pyramids. just advertised. I'm like, wow, this is really cool. And then he looked over at me with a mischievous grin. You want to buzz them? Can we? Is that legal? Hell no. But I'm Amherst's son. What are they going to do? Oh, that's Greenland. So, yeah. We buzzed the pyramids 3 times. Right over the Sphinx. I didn't know the Sphinx was there. Super low, below the tops of the pyramids. And giggling like schoolgirls the whole way. After we pulled up on the 3rd one, he says, okay, we better get out of here. Even I'm going to have some explaining to do. And that wasn't even the rest of the end of the day. So we go to the next airport that's in the middle of Cairo, and it's down surrounded by all, these really tall apartment buildings. And he sets me up on file. There's the runway. And first thing I noticed, there's a bunch of stuff kind of in the way, little dots. And as we got closer, the kids were flying hundreds of kites on top of the apartment buildings, on the approach path. And we kind of had to weave our way through that. And I was really tempted to get a couple of kills on the way in, but I figured I wouldn't be that much of a jerk. And then we got closer. I looked at the airport and I said, hey, Gamal, runway's filled with kids playing soccer. He goes, I know, they'll move. Okay. So you kind of come in, and just like kids in the U.S. playing street hockey, they looked over their shoulder, yelled, plane. And as you come in, they waited till the last second, and they just kind of got out of your way. You go past, and they folded right in behind you. It's like, this is the dangest thing. So I've been able to do a bunch of really, really cool stuff like that. But just the adventure isn't really, it's probably 50-50 about what I really love about ferry flying. The other thing I love about ferry flying is the people I meet, because I try to avoid the real big airports. I try to land at small airports whenever I can. Fuel's cheaper there, people are friendlier, and what are at small airports? Old degenerate pilots like you guys sitting on lawn chairs, grading landings and talking smart, which is fun. And when I land there talking to these guys, they all want to hear about my big adventures flying around the world. If I'm done for the day, half the time they'll take me home. We'll go out to dinner, have a few drinks. They get me drunk, try to get me to marry their daughter and bring her back to the U.S. Happened twice. Just a lot of fun, because pilots are the same worldwide. We've got our tribe, and you're my people. I love it, and I couldn't imagine doing anything else. So. Got a couple minutes left. I'm just going to briefly talk on handling aircraft emergencies, then we'll take some questions. So one of the things that I always talk to new pilots about is how to handle emergencies. They ask, Kerry, why didn't you panic when all these things happened? What happened? And what I learned over the years is basically, if you've got time to panic, you've got time to do something more productive. There's an old CFI thing that they used to tell you, first thing you have in an aircraft emergency, wind the 8-day clock on the instrument panel. It doesn't do anything actually productive, but it gives your nervous energy somewhere to go while your brain can kind of process what's going on. Now, of course, these days we don't have 8-day clocks. Everybody's got glass cockpits. So I'll tell people, maybe just get out your phone and update your Facebook status to it's complicated. But take that panic and anything that you got, put that away, and deal with the problem. Prioritize and compartmentalize. What's your first priority? Do you need to get pointed into a safe direction, go toward an airport? You're on fire. Do you need to start going down immediately? If it's one of those immediate things like engine loss and takeoff, are you a straight ahead guy or are you an impossible turn guy? Priority. Keep the plane under control and work the problem. What do I have? What do I have in the options? What's wrong? And figure out, how you can fix it. Because I see a lot of incident reports. I read everything I can about aircraft accidents and watch AOPA's Air Safety Institute videos. And you see there time and time again, guys are missing chances to get down safely. They overfly airports when they're running out of fuel. They fly into bad weather when they could have turned around. They keep going. And once they get into that position, they kind of panic and their brain shuts down. So just calm down, work the problem, and hope for the best.